Thomas Aquinas. We call him the dumb ox. 1248, Cologne, Germany. Every morning when he stepped into the library, Thomas drew a deep breath. The air in this chamber was different from the rest of the cathedral. He savored the strong acidity of fresh ink, the must of yellowed pages. The mingled scents always drew him toward the stacks of books. Some were centuries old, others had been hand-copied only days ago. The library was part of his morning ritual. Every day except Sunday, he rose before dawn, buckled a leather belt around his white tunic, and, if it was cold, pulled a black hooded robe over his head. He emptied his chamber pot into the chute at the end of the corridor, returned the pot to its place under his bed, and tucked the wool blanket under the corners of his straw mattress. Then he joined his fellow students in the refectory for the morning lecture with Master Albert. It lasted about 2 hours. Then they moved to the long, narrow tables against the wall and chanted a prayer together. Bowls of hot porridge were distributed and eaten in silence. When the schoolmaster dismissed them, Thomas always went directly to the library. Now he hunched his large frame to see the leather-bound volumes on the bottom shelf. When he found the one he was looking for, he carried it to a table under a window. The book was nearly the size of the small tabletop. By this time, the sun had risen well above the adjacent rooftops. He settled himself in a shaft of sunlight under the window and began to read, following the text with his index finger. From time to time, he scrawled notes in a small notebook he fished from the pocket dangling from his belt. "That's a rather sophisticated argument, don't you think?" He left the finger on the page to mark his place and slowly raised his eyes. He had been so absorbed in the reading he hadn't heard the man approach. It was a fellow student, leaning on the edge of the table, smiling. "What?" "The book. You've been reading it for hours. You missed the afternoon meal." Startled, he glanced at the window. The sun had passed its highest point and was just beginning to descend. "That means I only have a few minutes before the next lecture. I guess I lost track of time." The man laughed and stuck out a knobby hand. "I'm William." "Hi, I'm Thomas." "Yes, I know who you are. The big Italian who never says anything in class." Thomas leaned back on his stool. "That's a nicer way of putting it than what people usually call me." "The dumb ox." "There's nothing wrong with being quiet. The students are just used to everyone here arguing with the lecturers to prove how smart they are. Plus, they've never seen a Dominican friar with the shoulders of a blacksmith." He dragged a second chair under the window and sat. "Anyway, maybe I can help you. I'm a tutor here. I'd be glad to assist you with your studies," he smiled. "Oh, thank you. But there really is no need, no obligation, just as a friend. Really, I'd be glad to." "He's so eager it would be rude to send him away," thought Thomas. "I'm honored by your offer," he said. "Thank you." "Great. We can start with this book. Master Albert assigned the reading?" "Yes. Let's see where you are." He leaned across the book and read past Thomas's finger. "Now I see why you were concentrating so hard. This section is a challenge for the brightest student." Thomas nodded politely. "I love this argument. The logic is so intricate, so careful. Let me see if I can explain it." He glanced at the page again, tapping a finger on the table. Thomas waited. William cleared his throat. Actually, it would be hard to just jump in and explain. We should start a bit earlier in the text. He fiddled with the large pages. Perhaps I could try explaining it to you, and you can correct me where I am wrong, prompted Thomas. William pushed the book aside with relief and smiled. Yes, good idea. Go ahead. Thomas began to lay out the writer's argument, speaking slowly and carefully. William leaned forward, stunned at the clarity of the young man's logic. He's doing more than summarizing the book. He's pointing out the logical flaws. He says it so hesitantly, like he's unsure of himself, but every word he uses is precise, exact. What have I gotten myself into? But perhaps I misunderstood the author, Thomas was saying. What do you think? I think you should tutor me, William whispered. I'm sorry, I was out of line to speak for so long to a senior student. No, that's not what I mean, insisted William. I mean, you've been holding out with us with your silent routine. You just explained this topic to me more clearly than I have ever heard. I want you to be my tutor. Thomas scooted his chair back, hands raised. No, you have earned your position here. I don't want to damage your reputation. A scholar who puts his reputation over scholarship doesn't deserve to be a tutor. Humility is as desirable as knowledge. Well, Thomas scratched his head and then stuck out his big hand again. Okay, I'll do it, but don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone what? Asked a voice behind them. Master Albert! The schoolmaster stood behind the stacks, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He raised an eyebrow and peered at them over his long nose. Are you two up to something? No, Master Albert, said Thomas, respectfully lowering his gaze. William is tutoring me in the reading you assigned. The lecturer nodded. Good! Maybe he can also teach you to speak up in class. Yes, Master Albert, said William. And, Thomas, you are not permitted to skip meals to study. If you need help with your assignments, you will seek it from William or one of the other tutors, but not during prayer or meal times. Yes, Master Albert. I'll see you both at my next lecture in a few minutes. William grinned at Thomas as soon as he was gone. Yeah, you dumb ox. You know you can come to me when you need help. I'm sure I will learn a lot from you as we study together, insisted Thomas. William laughed at him again and stood. Can we meet tomorrow? I started writing a treatise on logic, and I'd like you to read it. Okay. They collected their books and parted. Thomas lumbered down the long corridor and went out a side exit into the wide rectangular courtyard. The air outside was warmer than he expected and fresher than inside the damp stone buildings. His stomach rumbled, complaining about the missed meal. But I did make a new friend, he told himself, and the reading was quite interesting. A pair of ducks paddled across the sparkling surface of the fish pond at the center of the yard. He lingered, watching them, feeling the sun on his face. Master Albert may not think much of me, but it is a privilege to study under him at the cathedral school. He settled himself on the low retaining wall of the pool, his long legs pressed against his chest. A leaf stirred by the breeze plinked into the water and disturbed his glassy reflection. Sometimes I can't believe I'm really here after everything it took to make it happen. Wasn't I only 5 years old when my parents dedicated me to a different future? I don't want to go to Monte Cassino, the boy had told his mother when he found out they were sending him to live at the monastery there. I want to stay with you. Theodora, his mother, firmly shut the lid of the trunk she was packing. You cannot become the abbot of Monte Cassino if you stay here. But I don't want to be an abbot. I want to be a knight, like my father and my brother Rinaldo. The abbey is a respectable future, my son, she said, taking him gently by the shoulders, and being a knight is not all sword play. It's because of your father's position as one of Emperor Friedrich's knights that you must go to Monte Cassino. I know you don't understand this yet, but the emperor is finally at peace with the pope, at least for now, and that means your father needs to build a good relationship with the church. You will get a fine education at the monastery and make your father proud. She kissed his forehead. The day Thomas set out from the family castle in Rocca-Sica, he was accompanied by his father, Sir Landulf of Aquino, and a host of his father's men. Thomas rode the whole way in silence. His father had been away in battle so much the boy thought of him as a stranger. Usually, when they were together, Landulf said little to him, but on this trip he was reassuring. Monte Cassino has a great heritage, Thomas, said the knight. It was founded by Benedict of Nursia, who built monasteries all over Italy. It stands high on a mountain for all the world to see. It used to be a military fortress, you know. Thomas didn't respond. Landulf dropped his voice to a whisper, like he was telling a secret. They say that before he captured Rome, the barbarian King Totila came to visit Benedict at this monastery. Thomas continued to stare at the seat across the carriage. Landulf took the boy by the chin and looked into his eyes. You're going to receive a great education here, and someday become the abbot. Make your father proud, Thomas. From the way his parents had described Monte Cassino, Thomas pictured a glorious castle on the mountain top, hedged by lush gardens and fields. But as they approached, he discovered that the monastery had served as a fort during Emperor Friedrich's recent struggle with the Pope. The old building had been damaged, and the fields were full of rocks, brambles, and broken down windmills. But the abbot who greeted them was friendly. You're taller than I expected, but you must be Thomas, he said, searching for the boy's hand. Welcome to Monte Cassino. Thomas spent nearly 9 years there. He was surprised to discover that he loved books. He hurried through his chores, planting grain in the fields, scrubbing the cobblestones, carrying water to the monks' rooms, so he could sneak into the scriptorium and watch the monks copy books. The abbot quickly realized that his young helper was bright. By the time he was 14, Thomas had nearly decided to dedicate his life to the monastery. But something happened before he could take the solemn vow. Emperor Friedrich declared war against the Pope again. The Pope excommunicated the emperor from the Church of Rome, so Friedrich expelled all the Pope's supporters from his territories. For safety, the abbot sent Thomas to Naples to study at the brand new university founded by the emperor. His first day there, he noticed several men wearing black wool cloaks. As they made their way toward the cathedral, people paused on the street to hand them loaves of bread and vegetables. The men raised their hands in blessing and tucked the offerings into their robes. Those beggars are monks, he noted with surprise, but they wore black cloaks instead of the brown camel hair ones typical of the Benedictines. And the Benedictines in Monte Cassino never begged. They grew their own vegetables and baked their own bread. They even provided for the poorest people in the nearby villages. He had never seen a monk ask someone to provide for him. "Excuse me," said Thomas, stopping a man coming toward him. "Who are those men over there?" The man looked in the direction he was pointing. "Those are Dominican monks. Have you never heard of them?" "I've heard of them, but I've never seen them." "They are an order of preachers active in the university, as students and teachers. They were founded not even 100 years ago by a teacher named Dominic." Thomas thanked him for the information and set out to find the university. He had been in Naples for only a few days when he met one of the Dominican preachers. Friar John was from San Giuliano. He taught at the university and at the cathedral, a popular teacher in both places. When he spoke, he often closed his eyes, clasped his hands behind his back, and rocked slightly on his feet. Thomas found his lectures fascinating. Sometimes, after teaching at the university, Friar John would invite Thomas to walk back with him to the cathedral. They were an unlikely pair, the slight preacher in his black cap and cloak, and the stocky teenager in his camel hair robe. The friar did most of the talking. Thomas just listened. "You're a humble man," the preacher observed one afternoon, "eager to learn, but not eager to speak. Tell me, Thomas, what do you think of the Dominicans?" Thomas hesitated. "I guess I am surprised to find monks so interested in the university. You are as dedicated to teaching as bishops, but unlike them, you are not bound to one congregation." John smiled. "We Dominicans honor education and teach wherever we go. Your Benedictine abbot was not a man of learning?" "It's not that the Benedictines don't see the value of knowledge. My abbot made sure I received a basic education in Monte Cassino." He paused. "But they don't travel around for the sake of teaching. They find it more important to separate themselves from the world so they can concentrate on prayer." "No one can spend enough time in prayer," agreed John. "They are right to emphasize that. But if every man of prayer locks himself away all the time, who is there to teach others to pray?" Thomas thought about this. "The Benedictines give to the poor, but you Dominicans ask the poor to give to you. Why do you beg for your food instead of work for it?" "Like you said, prayer is the key to the Christian life. We believe that God wants us to rely on Him for all that we need. So we ask God to provide our food and shelter. And then we ask His people to share with us the blessings He has given them." Thomas was even more quiet the rest of the way home. After months of listening to Friar John, he finally decided he did not want to dedicate himself to the Benedictine order after all. But he didn't know what he was going to do instead. John encouraged him to consider joining the Dominicans and become a teacher, but Thomas knew it would upset his parents. The Dominicans were loyal to the Pope, not to Emperor Friedrich. Besides, no wealthy family wanted a beggar for a son. Then came a conversation that changed his life for good. "Thomas!" called Friar John, hailing him on the steps outside the cathedral. "Thomas, a wonderful opportunity has come up. The Master General, John, of Wildschausen, has arrived in Naples. I want you to meet him." Thomas wasn't sure what to say. "I haven't decided yet if I should join the Dominicans. I want to, but I'm not willing to dishonor my parents." "I know," said John. "Wealthy and important families usually object to their sons joining our order. But that is not enough of a reason to reject us, and things usually have a way of working themselves out with parents. I need more time to decide." "I'm sorry," John said, "but the Master General won't be in the area for long. If you don't decide now, it may be a long time before you have the chance again." "What happens if I decide to join?" "I have told him about you, and he is anxious to meet you," said John. "He'll take you to Paris to continue your education." I'd have to leave my studies here. Paris is the best theology school in the world. But I'm only 19. Don't I have to be older to join the order? The Dominicans don't accept anyone under 18. Thomas looked at his friend. He had run out of excuses, and it sounded exciting. Okay, he agreed finally. Take me to meet the Master General. John of Wildeshausen liked Thomas immediately. Within days they left for Paris on horseback, planning to stop in Bologna on the way. But thunderstorms slowed their progress. Heavy rains spattered off the trees and dug rivulets in the road. They were soon cold, wet, and coated with mud. Maybe we should stop and wait for the storm to pass, shouted one of their companions. No, insisted the Master General. It will soon be dark, and the road will be more dangerous. There is a town not far ahead where we can stop for the night. They urged the horses to go faster. The daylight began to fade, and the woods grew denser as they entered the valley. In the gray mist below the trees suddenly appeared a band of men. Thomas's horse reared in surprise and tossed him into the mud. "What is this?" shouted the Master General. Swords rang out of their sheaths. The Dominicans found the blades pointed at their necks. "Nobody move!" somebody growled. A bulky figure shouldered his way past the line of marauders and stooped over Thomas in the mud. Sheets of drizzle were still falling, and the sky had grown dark. Thomas couldn't make out the man's face. "You are Thomas?" "Leave him alone," cried the Master General. He struggled to free himself, but the raiders forced him to the ground. "This is the one we want," said the leader. "His family will pay a high price for his ransom." With a grunt, he pulled Thomas to his feet. "Don't hurt them," Thomas said quietly. "I'll come with you if you promise not to harm the others." The leader clutched at Thomas's black cloak. "First, you'll take off that disgraceful robe." "This is a symbol of my dedication to the Dominicans. I will not remove it." They tried to pry it off him, but he shoved them away. "Forget it," ordered the leader. "I don't want him injured." He shoved Thomas toward his horse. "Get on the horse. I'll walk." "Don't try to slow us down. Get on the horse." His hand was still on his sword. Thomas climbed back on his horse and turned to his companions in the dark. "Grace be with you, brothers." He was forced into the woods. They rode well into the night. For hours no one spoke. Finally, Thomas insisted on knowing where they were taking him. "Rocasica," was the answer. "Rocasica? Who is behind this?" he demanded. "Quiet," they growled at him. The sky was just beginning to lighten again when they approached a castle. Thomas was dismayed to make out a flag bearing his grandfather's crest. "This is my mother's castle." He cut off the leader's horse, forcing him to stop. "Who are you?" The man threw back his deep hood. It was his brother Rinaldo. "Why are you doing this?" cried Thomas. "You're a disgrace to our family. Take him to the tower." They dragged him, soaked with rain and mud, into the castle. He was sleeping on the stone floor when the scraping of a lock woke him. It had been several years since he had seen his mother. Theodora's face was slightly fuller, and the hair around her temples lighter, but she still had the proud bearing of her Norman ancestors. "I did not expect to see you next, under such conditions," she said from the door. "Nor did I." She took a step forward. "How could you do this to your family, Thomas?" "Me? You sent my brother to kidnap me." "He was the only one I could trust to stop you." He looked away, unwilling to see the disappointment on her face. I haven't done anything except devote myself to prayer and study. You're the one who wanted me to become a monk." "A Benedictine monk," corrected Theodora, "not a Dominican. They are loyal to the Pope, and the Pope is Friedrich's enemy." "At the moment, but Friedrich changes his mind every day. Anyway, that doesn't matter. I believe in their mission. There is much more at stake than what you believe. Your first duty is to your family." "Respectfully, mother, you are wrong. My first duty is to my conscience." "You will not leave here until you agree to abandon the order." He folded his arms across the black robe and refused to say anything more. "Get him some dry clothes and food," she demanded as she swept out the door. The key turned again in the lock. When the clothes were tossed into the cell, he gladly changed into dry trousers and a clean tunic, but immediately pulled the muddy robe over them. He was imprisoned in the tower for months. When the Master General discovered who was behind the kidnapping, he petitioned the Pope to secure Thomas's release. But the castle was in Friedrich's territory, and he refused to entertain pleas, especially from the Pope. All of his brothers and sisters came to convince Thomas to leave the Dominicans. His sister Marota visited him in his cell every day. He hadn't seen her since she was a little girl. She looked a lot like their mother now. Her tone was angry, but she brought him extra food and books. "Don't you see how hard this is on all of us?" she pouted. "Would it really be so terrible to join the Benedictines instead and get back to your studies in peace?" "I have committed myself to the Dominican cause," insisted Thomas, shaking his head. "They love education, but they don't keep it to themselves. They go from town to town preaching the Scripture to all who will listen." "But, Thomas, you have to beg for your living." Her dark eyes were wide with disbelief. His voice was gentle. "Jesus told us not to worry about tomorrow. By begging each day for only what I need that day, I can concentrate on living that day in a manner that pleases God." "But you'll lose Mother's support." "You're not hearing me," said Thomas tenderly. "I don't need her money. God supplies for me wherever I go, through his faithful servants who share whatever I need." She saw the sincerity on his face. "You are really free from the cares of this world, aren't you?" "Yes, sister, I am. I only wish I could make our mother see that." "Give her time," said Marota. "She is stubborn, but she will not hold you here forever." Rinaldo came to see Thomas too. First he offered him money to leave the Dominican order. When that didn't work, he threatened his brother. "What more can you do to me?" Thomas shrugged in response. "I'm already a prisoner in my own castle." He spent most of his time reading the Bible and writing in his notebooks. Eventually his mother gave in and allowed some of his Dominican friends to visit him in the tower, but she refused to release him. One day Marota told her brother she had decided to join him. "I want to dedicate my life to God like you have," she said, "and some of our brothers and cousins are beginning to think this way as well. It seems your time here has been profitable after all." "I'm so glad to hear it," he said, shaking her hand. "I will pray for you. Mother will not be happy." Theodora arrived at the door soon after Marota left. "I suppose you have heard your sister's news already," she said accusingly. He nodded. "It appears your presence here has hurt Friedrich's cause more than it has helped." "I'm sorry, Mother," said Thomas. "I do not mean to hurt our family's reputation or security with the Emperor. I am simply doing what I believe is right." "And now your sister has taken up your cause. She intends to join a Dominican convent instead of marrying the knight I have chosen for her." Thomas decided it was best not to respond. She went to him and put her hand on his arm. He was almost twice her size. "You have changed so much since we sent you to Monte Cassino, Thomas. You're much taller and stronger and more educated." She sighed. "But you're just as stubborn. I've only ever wanted what is best for you and for this family. You know that I love you." "I know, Mother. You resisted me at 5, and you continue to resist me at 20. I can see I will never convince you, so I might as well let you go." She looked up at him with tearful eyes. "You're free to go, but you are on your own now. If you choose to side with the Pope over the Emperor, your family will never support you." "I understand," he said, kissing the top of her head. "God be with you, Mother." Immediately he set out for Paris with his friends, who were overjoyed at his release. The Master General happily introduced him to a professor named Albert. Master Albert thought him odd and unusually quiet, but he liked him, and invited him to go to the school in Cologne with him. And now he found himself sitting in the cathedral courtyard in Cologne, staring at the broad forehead and wide shoulders reflected back at him from the fish pond. Was all that worth going through to get here? He wondered. The reflection nodded. Yes. Then forget your family's reputation. Forget what the other students call you. Seek Master Albert's direction. Use your mind for the glory of God, and you will have fulfilled your purpose. "Master Albert! I'm going to be late for his lecture," he mumbled aloud. He pulled himself to his feet and headed for the arches on the far side of the courtyard. He didn't notice he had left his notebook beside the pool. The breeze was ruffling the pages when William came by a few minutes later. He was going to be late too, but he snatched up the book when he saw it. "This belongs to Thomas," he thought. "I'd better take it with me." Rushing down the corridor toward the refectory, he glanced through the pages. He was so amazed at what he read that he stopped walking, his face buried in the book. "What are you doing out here, William?" called Master Albert, passing him in the corridor. "You will be late for my lecture." He looked up in surprise. "Sorry, sir." "What are you reading?" "It's Thomas's notebook. He left it out by the pond." The schoolmaster held out his hand. "I'll see that it is returned." "Yes, Master Albert," said William, handing it over. "But you might want to read a little of it first." The schoolmaster leafed through the pages, stopped, turned a few more pages, and stopped again. "Well, I see what you mean," he said. "His handwriting is almost impossible to read, but these conclusions are astonishing." "He's a genius," declared William. "We call him the dumb ox," said the schoolmaster, grinning. "But I have a feeling that the bellowing of this ox will one day resound throughout the whole world. I think I'll read a little more of this before I give it back." He clapped a hand on William's shoulder, and they went to meet Thomas in the refectory. Thomas became a lecturer at the university in Paris, and traveled to various cities teaching theology. He wrote a set of books called the Summa Theologica that became standard textbooks in the Church. No theologian since Augustine had as much influence on the Church as Thomas did. He died on March 7th, 1274, and is still a controversial figure.